Well, I'm sitting in the boomer chair, which means it's time for more enthralling tales of the distant past. And today I want to talk about the second generation Dodge Charger. It's 1968 to 70. And the thing that brings me to this is that the last video we did, we were talking about space, the need for space. And I explained how I bought a stolen recovery 1969 Charger. This is in 1978 for 20 bucks. And I put it together in front of my parents' house on the street, under the street light. And after I sent that video, it occurred to me, I says, man, that just seems so outlandish today, given the value, the desirability, and the value of second generation Chargers. To buy a car like that, the thought of buying a car like that for like 20 bucks is just like, it's outrageous, right? But it wasn't in the day. There was a time when those cars were completely worthless. Nobody wanted them. Well, a couple of people did, but so few, and there were so many of them. The car has a very unique history, both pre-production, during production, and post-production. There's an up and a down that nobody ever talks about, and I thought it would be an interesting topic. So understanding the second generation Dodge Charger. Now, to do this, you have to go back approximately 10 years before the car was introduced in '68. And a pivotal event, one of the most important events, pivotal events in the history of Chrysler Corporation, and that was Virgil Exner's heart attack. So Virgil Exner was the lead stylist for Chrysler in the 1950s. And he was responsible for a thing called the forward look. Now, remember, in the 1950s, late 1950s especially, Chrysler had a reputation as being ahead of the curve. It was a state-of-the-art manufacturer. Technologically, they had the Hemi, they had the torque flight transmission, they had the torsion bars. In 1958, they introduced electronic fuel injection as a regular production option. They were leaders in the field as far as technology goes. And with Virgil Exner, they now had the styling to match it. Virgil Exner was responsible for the forward look. That's that long, sweeping, graceful styling with the fins, and just beautiful. These cars are poetry in motion. The styling fit the technology, and Chrysler was very respected at that period of time as a leader in a lot of ways. So 1958 or so, Virgil has a heart attack. Now, pre-heart attack Virgil had these beautiful, graceful visions of speed and luxury and power. And post-heart attack Virgil, he was different. Maybe there was a thing with oxygen going to the brain, I don't know. But when he penciled out the plans for the 1960, 61, 62 cars, they were a little bit different. Where the previous cars were just beautiful, the post-heart attack cars, the Road Toads, the 62 B-bodies, oh, they were weird. Okay, these were faces only a real Mopar person can love. To this day, they're just weird. They're weird sideways fins, weird bulges here and there, the whole asymmetrical thing. The butter had slipped off of Virgil's noodle, and it showed in the drawings. And it crushed Chrysler sales. Any image, any public image they had of being forward-looking and progressive, well, now they were just known as weird, and the general public steered clear of them. So at that point, Exner was out, and they brought in Elwood Engel. And Engel is responsible for what I consider to be the iconic Mopar look. The 1967 Dart, which ran all the way through '76, relatively unchanged as far as the overall look of the car. And in my opinion, the most Mopar-looking cars of all, the 66, 67 B-bodies. Crisp lines, that swept-back C-pillar, just beautiful cars. And the general public started to gravitate back towards Chrysler. Sales were up. The cars weren't so weird looking. They had a distinctive Chrysler look to them, but they weren't weird like the 62s. So the public started gravitating back, but not in big enough numbers to keep the company competitive with the other two manufacturers, General Motors and Ford. So beginning in 1968, Chrysler took a shift. Now, there's no records of this. This isn't anything official. But I can just imagine myself as a fly on the wall at the stylists' meeting in late 1965 when they're talking about introducing the 68 cars, or were designed in the 1968 cars. And I pictured a stylist all sitting around, one's from Dodge and from Plymouth, and an executive comes in and he plops out a picture of a 66 GTO. And he says, okay, make me this, but change everything on it just enough so that you can't recognize it as this. And the stylists say, okay, you got it. So the 1968 Chrysler B-bodies were styled after that 1966 General Motors. Okay, so you get the general idea. The crisp, clean lines were gone. There were some crisp, clean lines, but now the curves were in. The cars had hips. They had just the right type of bulges and graceful. They started to look very organic. The previous cars, the 66, 67 cars looked chiseled. The 68 cars looked organic, right? Curves everywhere. Not masculine, not feminine, kind of a combination of the two. But they pulled it off beautifully. I see a 68 B-body, and I see a 66 Goat, as well as some Ford cars. But let's not even get into that now. Let's go to the Charger. So the Charger nameplate itself was introduced in 1966, and it was supposed to be an image car. It was a performance image car, performance luxury image car, along the lines of, let's say, a T-Bird of the era, the Olds Toronado. You get the idea, right? So it was supposed to be a personal luxury, a high-end car, and it was based on the Coronet. The Plymouth version of this was the Barracuda. So Dodge was going to have a B-body version of that prestige, personal luxury performance image car. So the initial Charger, and we have one, we've got our 67, and that's my personal favorite. Out of all of the Charger body styles, I think the 66, 67 talks to me because I identify with that angle styling. But that's besides the point. They're all beautiful cars. So it was introduced as a high-end car. And it's a little weird looking. It's a little, because the fastback roof really doesn't quite fit the rest of the package, but it's okay. They pulled it off. And hideaway headlights, high style, high option car. So with the 1968 B-bodies, the restyling of the Charger to take on that organic curved look, well, they just hit it right out of the park. It's like if you look at the Coronets and you look at the Belvederes and Satellites from 68, you could see all of those, the hips, you see the curves, you see all that built into it. But with the Charger, they really went all the way. And here's the thing, right? You want to talk about like design language. If you want to see like the GM muscular performance design language and its evolution, look at side-by-side pictures of a 68 Corvette next to a 68 Charger. And it's like you'd almost think they were produced by the same manufacturer. That's because it had that design language, that muscular, curvy, organic design language. So they introduced the car in 1968. They're only expecting to sell 30 or 40,000 of them. The previous year in 67, they only sold about 7,000 Chargers. So they weren't looking for a big volume car, but they got it with the 68 Charger because it just hit on every level. And the public loved it. They expected to sell like 30,000. They sold almost 100,000 of them. There was nothing not to love about this car. It looks chiseled out of a block of granite. It's just on wheels. It's just beautiful from every angle, like literally from every angle. And it's unique. It's all to itself. The only real styling borrowed from any other part of the Chrysler lineup was the flip-top gas cap they took from the Barracuda. But even that, they stuck on top of the quarter panel like a race car would have, right? And one of the ironic things about the Charger, as far as its performance life, or its performance aspects, is that while it was designed to look like a muscle car, like a race car, like it's going 200 miles an hour standing still, and it does, the things that made it look so fast style-wise actually held it back on the speedways. The recessed grille and that tunneled back window were aerodynamic liabilities. Over 150, 160 miles an hour, they became real problems. Cars weren't stable. That's why in 1969, for NASCAR use, they grafted in the 1968 Coronet grille, mounted it flush on the nose of the Charger, and they put the fastback window in it and came up with a Charger 500. Just for NASCAR use. So they had to actually demuscularize its look to make it function on the speedway. So the car is introduced as a performance image luxury car. and it takes off. Everybody loves this car. It becomes a movie star right away. Bullet. Who hasn't seen, Bullet, the chase scene in Bullet? And that scene could only be done with a Charger. Bad guys drove Chargers, right? That part at the beginning of the chase where he's putting on his leather driving gloves, that could only happen in a Charger, right? So the public loves it. It ends up in all sorts of movies. They sell a bunch of them. But while it's a performance car, a performance image car, it's not really a performance car. So over the course of that run from 68 to 70, they built approximately 230,000 of these cars. And only about 40,000 of them were RTs. So the RT was the performance version of it. So that had the heavy-duty suspension, had a 440 as a standard engine, had the 426 Hemi as optional. It had a torque flight standard, but a no-cost 4-speed. I had, dual exhaust. I had everything that a muscle car should have, with a lot of extra weight. Back in those days, it used to be called gingerbread, right? So gingerbread is anything that's on a car that doesn't make it function. The Chargers were high-end cars. So they had bucket seats, they had extra padding everywhere, like the top of the door panels were padded, they had like pouches on the side, like map pouches on the sides of the doors, the armrests were a little bit longer, everything was padded, everything was a little bit more unique, everything was like higher end than any other car in the B-body lineup, the Chrysler B-body lineup. All of those things add up to weight. And like I said, only about 20% of the cars were ordered as RT models. The rest of them, the vast majority of them, were 318 two-barrel cars. There were some slant sixes. The majority were 318 two-barrel. There were a bunch of 383 two-barrel and some 383 four-barrel, but for the most part, at least half of the Chargers produced at that period of time were just plain Jane, single exhaust, 294 gear, 318 two-barrel, and most of them had air conditioning, power steering, power brakes. They had all of the options. And from a performance perspective, you're just adding weight. Those cars were all over 4,000 pounds, dripping wet, ready to go, where an equivalent Roadrunner was like 500 pounds lighter. So you didn't go for a Charger if you were a blood and guts performance guy. You went for a Charger, even in RT, if you were a performance guy but was more style conscious and wanted a bit of luxury with your muscle. That was the positioning of the Charger. So during the car's 3-year run, it kind of stepped down a little bit each year. So the 68 was maximum Charger. It was what the designers wanted it to be, expected it to be, no holds barred. 69, they tempered it a little bit. And actually, the truth is I prefer the 69, not because I had a bunch of them, but because I like the beak. I think the beak and the grille breaking up that just wide open, I think the beak adds a nice detail. And I like the horizontal taillights as opposed to the round ones on the 68. But the 69, the 68 and the 69 were pretty much unchanged from those two things. They changed the texture on the dashboard from like lines to like a pebble grain, little things like that. They changed the design on the seats from the pleats on the 68 to a slab on 69. One of the things about 68 Chargers is they've got the hideaway headlights. So the 68, when the headlight is open, there's actually a bezel that goes around the headlights, so that even if the headlight doors are open, it still looks right, like it's a complete grille. And they did away with that in 69, like they cheapened it a little bit. And in 70, it got cheapened again. All of the padding inside the car became molded plastic instead of soft, and that was hard and plasticky. They added that loop bumper to the front of it, which does and doesn't go with the car, but each year they sold a few less. The first year they sold like 95,000 of them. The second year they sold like almost 60,000 of them, and then 85,000 in the second year, and then 1970 they only sold about 50,000 of them. But again, most of those cars, the vast majority of those cars, were 318 two-barrel, take the kids to school cars, family cars. They were family cars. Now, the sales were good. The image was good, but the street cred wasn't there because the cars were heavy. They weren't particularly heavy in and of themselves, but compared to the other bodies you could use, you could have muscle car engines in that era, they were heavy. They weren't street rat material. Not to say that some of them weren't out there doing it, but they just weren't really street rat material. So during their production run, they were popular, they were recognized, they were loved. Post-production, things took a little bit of a turn. So, and this is where you get to that point where they were really worthless. Styling changed. The American tastes in styling changed drastically around 1974. 1973, 1974, definitely into 1975. That chiseled, organic, tough, beautiful look that we recognize as 1960s styling gave way to like opera windows and stand-up grills and, Corinthian leather. The public's taste changed, and cars styled in that iconic 60s styling, that muscle car styling, well, they really, really looked dated. They were only like 3 years old, 4 years old at the time, but they looked like they were 1,000 years old. They looked like they were from another era. And people being style conscious to where they are just did not want these cars. And so you get to this point in 1975, 1976, where these cars were still around, they're still completely viable, but nobody wanted them. It was the kind of thing, well, it ran out of gas, I'll take the plate off it. Oh, it needs a water pump, oh, that's too much, junk it. People didn't want these cars. Muscle car guys, performance guys, street rats, didn't want these cars either. And again, we're talking about like 1975, this era between like 1975 and like 1982, 1983. That's about where it changed, where the value of the Charger plummeted. They didn't have the street cred that the other B-bodies did. And then you also have to remember that in 1970, you had the E-bodies introduced. So people looking for high style and performance went the E-body route for the most part. So there were Cudas and Challengers everywhere. And they all had the same stuff. They were all jacked up on the back. They all had Cragar SS's or Keystone Classics on them. They had side pipes. They put lights underneath them. They would cover the interiors with fur. Fur, could you imagine that? They put it all over the dashboard and on the console. This was the style of the day. My personal taste in that era when I was a teenager was the exact opposite. I liked black primer and dog dish hubcaps. I didn't want to have anything to do with the flash. But needless to say, the Charger fell out of favor. It was too bulky and too heavy to be used as a real, street rat performance car, and it didn't have the muscle car cred, the street cred, or the style even, to be desirable among, just the casual performance enthusiast. At that period of time, in 1975, 1976, 1977, you were more likely to see like a fat old guy chewing a cigar, sitting at a stoplight in a Charger, in a dented up 68 to 70 Charger, than you were likely to see it at a drag strip. You were far more likely to see these cars in supermarket parking lots than you were at cruise nights. Now, there were exceptions. There were definitely exceptions. In fact, I had a friend of mine, a guy named Gus, had a car called the Cherry Charger, which was a 69 Charger. This thing was immaculate. It was a show car, custom paint, custom this, custom that, had a 383 with a tunnel ram on it, chrome everywhere. There were exceptions to the rule. There were some people who indulged in the Charger thing, but they were the exception rather than the rule. Most of the performance guys, most of the muscle car guys of that era, the post-muscle car era, or during the malaise era, let's say, gravitated towards E-bodies and stuff like that. And you want a real performance, you want to go out and street race the car, it's going to be a 340 Duster or a 340 Dart, or a 440 Dart, it's going to be a Roadrunner with a 440 or a GTX. It's going to be one of those cars. It's not going to be a Charger. The Charger just has too much stuff on it. So the values plummeted. These cars were littered, junkyards everywhere. Chargers, second generation Chargers were everywhere. They were even beautiful in the junkyards. I'll never forget walking into Yacarino's one day, and they had a Charger sitting there. I think it was a 70, and it had just started to snow. Yacarino's was a junkyard, I should say that, right? It had just started to snow, and the snow filled in the top body lines of the car, that crease in the door where the front bulge melds into the back one. The snow had just covered the body line of the car, and I remember looking at that thing and saying, that is just the most beautiful sight, even though it was in a junkyard and the car was trashed. So that's when I came along with the Chargers. Yeah, as a broke kid, I couldn't even think about a Cuda or a Challenger. Those cars would go for $1,500 even back in the day, $2,000. That was a lot of money back then. And things like Roadrunners, functional cars like Roadrunners and Super Bs and stuff like that, they were all desirable cars too. So you could still pay. You can get them cheap, but you'd still expect to pay $600, $700, $800 for a complete car. Chargers, on the other hand, no, they were a dime a dozen. People were leaving them on the side of their house. They'd take the plates off of them, and they would just rot there. And it's like, what do you want for that car on the side of the house? The junkyard will give me $25 if I can get it over there. Okay, I'll give you 20 right now. Sold. And that's how the deals on those cars were made. And they were everywhere. So that was the bottoming out of the value of the Dodge Charger, the second generation Dodge Charger. But then it turned around. Now, a lot of people credit the Dukes of Hazzard as being the thing that put the Charger back into public consciousness and created the desirability for it. But I was there, and I was like deeply involved in the whole Charger thing at that time, 1979, 1980, 81. And the Dukes of Hazzard was a popular TV show, but nobody out on the streets was saying, I need a Charger so I could have like a Dukes of Hazzard car. Mostly the people who were following that show were younger kids. They were like 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And it wasn't until, let's say, the middle 80s, that they started to really come into their own and they started buying those cars up. The Charger had started to take off in popularity based on the resurgence or the interest in restoring muscle cars in general. And that happened at around 1982, 1983. Because at that point, the car culture looked at the landscape and said, oh, this is just dismal. When were things cool? Oh, we got to go back to 1970 and earlier. Great. And so that's when the muscle car thing started to take off. And actually, I started writing for Musclecar magazine in 1985. So I was there during this whole evolutionary period. I was an active participant during this period. So the Dukes of Hazzard definitely put the car in public awareness, but they had started to increase in value and desirability more because of their styling. And it's timeless. It's a timeless style. They are, like, if you picture a muscle car, you say muscle car. The Charger is it. The 68 to 70 Charger is it. It's the definition of muscle car. It's beautiful from every angle. And I mean, they drag down big bucks today, even for wrecks, they drag down big bucks. But you know what? They're worth it. Even a 318 car, even a slant 6 car. They now have the position, the prestige position that they should have had all along. But yes, at one point, you couldn't give them away. They were just, nobody wanted them. So just to put a postscript on the video we did the other day, because some of you asked, well, what happened to your Charger? So I'll give you the quick story on that. I'll give you the quick evolution on that. So I put it together with an engine. The first engine I had in there was a 440, and I bought this thing from a junkyard called Yacarino's, and I brought it home piece by piece. I had to disassemble it at the junkyard. I had no way to get it home, so I had to disassemble it at the junkyard and drag it home piece by piece. And I did. And I put the engine together and got it in the car and got it running. And at somewhere along the line, I acquired a 6-pack setup off of a wrecked Roadrunner, and I put that on there and got the car running. And I don't remember if it was exceptionally fast. I mean, never went to a drag strip or anything like that. I was a kid, and I did burnouts on my neighborhood and got myself in trouble. But it was a fun car. And that motor met its demise because I had to put antifreeze in it. I was a kid, right? Who can afford it? 99 cents a gallon, who the hell can afford antifreeze? So I had water in it, it froze, it cracked the block, that was it. So the next engine in there was a 400. That stayed for a while. It was a 400 4-barrel. That stayed for a little while, and I spun a bearing in that. I was out of money, out of everything, out of luck. I needed to have the car mobile. So there was a car in the woods that had a 273 in it with an automatic. So I took the motor and trans out of the car in the woods, stolen car in the woods. I stuck it in my Charger, and it stayed like that for about a year. I ran it around like that as just a driver. I had other cars that I was screwing around with at the same time. I just needed to keep that one mobile. And then, funny thing happened. I know this is getting long, but you know what? You're stuck around this long. I'll just keep telling the story. I'm in my shop. I had a shop right off on Old Amboy Road on Staten Island. And I'm working on of all things, a Charger, a blue 70 Charger. And as I'm working on the car, you hear a crash outside, right? So drop what I'm doing, I walk outside, and literally right in front of my door, like literally right in front of my door, there's a 77 Plymouth Fury, right? So the car's just a couple of years old at this point. 77 Plymouth Fury. It's a Vermont State Police car. It's got the cop wheels, it's got dual exhaust and everything, and it's crashed into something. I forgot what it crashed into. And the nose is all bashed in, and it's dripping antifreeze all over the place. And the guy's okay, the driver gets out of the car, he's okay, but he's got to get to Vermont. So he says, can I leave the car here and I'll have the insurance company come and look at it? I says, sure, no problem. So we got the car into my area, in my parking lot, and I sat there for like a few weeks or a month. And this thing was full cop everything. Cop engine, cop suspension, cop brakes, cop steering. Okay, so $440. So the insurance adjuster comes, says, okay, the car's totaled. He says, what do we owe you for storage? I says, I don't know. He says, well, I can pay you this rate for the storage. I could just give you the car. I says, I'll take the car. So he gives me the car. So I transplanted the 440 and everything out of that car into the Charger. And I ran that around for a little while. And I put a 6-pack on that, and I converted the car to 4-speed and ran the car around the area. But at the time, I was 20 years old, and I was obsessed with Hemis. I needed to have a Hemi. So I lived in a studio apartment, and the only place I had to work on this car was on the side of the house. And I had a toolbox in the apartment, and I started building my first Hemi, and I did this on the couch, next to the couch, I should say. It was like my coffee table. So I built a 426 Hemi in there, and I was getting ready to put it in the car, in the Charger. So I put a Dana in it. I put different, I think I put a set of super stock springs, and I don't remember what springs I put in there, but I put the Dana, I put a set of springs in there. I put the Hemi K-frame in it, and I was getting ready to put the motor in the car. And I went out, and I'm looking at the car, and I'm like, no, it's just too heavy. See, it was a thing, right? Chargers had a lot of stuff, and my Charger was no exception. Bucket seats, and everything, all of the luxury things that added up to a Charger. And I didn't want the car to be gutted. I wanted it just something I could drive and have fun with. So I looked at it, and I says, nah, that's just too heavy. It's just too much car for the Hemi. It's not going to be the car that I want it to be. And behind the Charger in the driveway, I had a 68 Roadrunner. So I says, that's the car that this engine needs to go into. So I took the Charger over to a shop that I was doing work out of, and I stripped it. I pulled the rear end out of it. I pulled the Hemi K-frame out of it. I pulled all of the stuff that I put in there. I have a Holly blue pump and all of that stuff, right? I took all of the parts out of it that were going to go with the Hemi, and I scrapped the body of the car. A couple of reasons. First, it was like I felt it was like my car. Like I had saved this thing, and I didn't really want to have. I didn't want to see it out in the world after I was done with it. So I was like, no, you know what? You're going. So I scrapped that body, and I put all of those parts in the 68 Roadrunner. So that was the story of my first car, or the first car I ever built, because there were two before that. And if you guys are interested, I'll tell you that story some other time. But there you go. The unlikely history of the second generation Dodge Charger. Top line car, top of the world to the bottom of the heap, and then right back to the top of the heap where it is today and where it really belongs. They are the ultimate muscle car statement from the ultimate muscle car era. All right, I hope you have fun with that. I'll see you tomorrow.